Ubisoft is literally dead, exactly as we predicted. And now the woke staff of losers are finally understanding, wait a minute, wokeness doesn't put exactly food on the table. How sad. How sad.
Ubisoft is worth about 1.59 billion euro on the stock market, but their
That's sad because they were worth more than 10 billion at one point.
new subsidiary, announced last week, is valued at 4.3 billion euro, which is a little bit more, and you might be thinking, how can that possibly make sense? And the reason
that makes sense because Tencent's investment in Ubisoft putting money into that. But there are things that don't make sense about this.
why is that Ubisoft leadership just sidestepped the stock market. It really is quite the story. So, Ubisoft's managing and founding family, the Guillemets, just got reinforcements in the corporate war that they have been waging, and it's all thanks to their long-term ally Tencent. You see, we've been following this story since it first.
Okay, listen. Tencent is not their ally. Tencent is only interested in getting back the money they have lost from Ubisoft. That's what's happening here. Tencent is not doing anything here out of the kindness of their heart.
Began last summer, and it involves the Guillemot brothers failing to defeat a hostile takeover of Gameloft in the early 2000s, and that leading to them not really wanting to be corporately screwed again. They then successfully defeated a hostile takeover attempt of Ubisoft in the late 2010s. Now, some people only think it is just now that Tencent has came onto the scene, but that is simply false, because Tencent have been involved for years. They actually increased their ownership stake to 49.9% of Guillemot brothers.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so exactly, Tencent has this much investment in it. This makes now sense, because we watched the Luke Stephens moronic video where nothing made sense considering he said, oh, the Guillemets only own 10% of the company. By the way, turns out Luke Stephens' history is in finance? That is horrible. Man, he was shit at his job, probably. Because I didn't understand. I'm like, wait, what do you mean the Guillemets have only a 10% stake holding in this? What do you mean Tencent has that? Yeah, this seems more likely.
Guillemot Brothers is the company through which the Guillemot...
Otherwise, they don't have control over the company and stuff. Okay, you see, when Tencent has 50% of everything, that's fine. And 5% voting rights is just a formality, obviously. Oh, then they can do these things, because previously it didn't make sense, because, listen, okay, I am way above qualification on, above average when it comes to finance, but I still don't have a lot. Well, I have very this much experience when it comes to what currently is happening with Ubisoft, and anyone who claims that he has on YouTube, by the way, is fucking lying to you, okay? They're lying, 100% lying. Maybe they have heard about it. Maybe they know like a interaction that happens like me, but they don't know shit. There's literally companies that are made to facilitate the things like this when they happen to companies, because it's not a thing that people people in finance typically encounter unless they specialize in it. Okay, so anyone who's saying, "Yeah, I know what's happening," is a fucking liar.
Own Ubisoft, and their share in that went up as of 2022. And it's through that deal that basically they fended off the hostile takeover attempt from Vivendi. And that is what has set us up for today's story, because in a way, this is not new. This is, though, evolution, and it's evolution that has been driven by the environment. So following Shadows, Ubisoft signed a new deal, and it's a deal designed to withstand a challenge from activist investors who want to force the Guillemets out. And with this deal being made, the Guillemets control...
Calling that activist investors, the people who have completely run Ubisoft into near bankruptcy, well, effectively actual real bankruptcy at this point. Oh, it's just a bunch of activists that don't like us for no reason. Bro, you literally burned something that was worth 10 billion to the ground, and now it's barely worth 1 billion. And now you're trying to take all of the good stuff from it and dip out with Tencent? Fuck you. Okay? Also, I mean, this is a situation that I have questions about, and I don't exactly know the answers. The big question that I already stated, and I'm going to state again, is what happens to the other shareholders and investors? Because can they not sue? It doesn't matter if they own the majority stock plus Tencent, and they decide, hey, we're gonna completely destroy the value of this stock and make a new thing, and all other stockholders are gonna get fucked. I mean, technically legal, but I'm pretty sure you can get sued for that anyway, because if this was normal and allowed constantly, this would have been abused to high fucking heaven throughout the industry at all points. So most likely the existing shareholders beyond them also have some kind of say in this. They also get a new pot. They also get some kind of magical pot of Ubisoft.
Over Ubisoft,
Well, the new Ubisoft 2.0.
in a way, is far stronger, but it has came at a cost. Tencent do have some more control now, and the rest of Ubisoft may well suffer. Let's get into all of the details. So the launch of Assassin's Creed Shadows likely put a final number in the deal, but obviously a deal like this does not just happen over a few days. Ubisoft and Tencent started talking about this stuff as far back as last October, right? So within the span of about 5 weeks, at that time, Ubisoft had seen the lackluster launch of Outlaws. They had a, let's just say, aggressive, manipulative open letter from AJ Investment.
This is also a huge issue that we currently don't know what's happening here, but the Gilbios were literally only talking to Tencent about what this plan, as far as we currently know, and that's a problem because that means that they hid this information from investors, who again would not be probably happy with the idea that their investment that has already deteriorated in value by 80%, well 90%, is gonna further get fucked in the ass because the Gilmos just wanna keep being in power. So I'm pretty sure that again at this point I don't know how these things work out. I don't have experience in. And again, no one else on YouTube has. I can guarantee you that shit. But this seems like it's a lawsuit just waiting to happen. Because this action, if it doesn't already encompass already other existing other investment groups, it's gonna fuck them over royally. And this should not be allowed. Otherwise, the whole, the stock market is already imaginary bullshit that makes me money for free. Because hype matters more than actual profitability. And I'm not joking about that, by the way. I'm not. WeWork, Theranos, Lime, all of this Discord. Discord's gonna soon be public, by the way. All of this shit is just based on hype and nothing else. There's no profitability, there's just hype.
And then the delay of Assassin's Creed Shadows to February. Now, that was well before the January stock update, where the company asked advisors to, quote, pursue various transformational, strategic, and capitalistic options to extract the best value for shareholders, which, is kind of what all of this stuff is. Now, that was all part of the same plan, the plan being to keep the shareholders happy, to give them signs of progress being made. And in that instance, the sign was, of course, studio closures and layoffs. But all the while, they were working with Tencent to find a solution that keeps Ubisoft running. Now, previously, last week's video, actually before any of this went public, we reported that there were rumors of an Ubisoft split coming, where some intellectual property would be siloed off, basically to make Ubisoft more efficient. Fun corporate shenanigans that I'll get into. As it turns out, those rumors were true, but the framing was not true, because this is not an independent company. This is something that is happening within Ubisoft. Okay, so here's how the deal is working. Tencent are investing 1.16 billion euro, but not in Ubisoft as a whole.
That's roughly half, and by the way, that is... Wait, 1.6? I thought it was 1.2. Whatever. By the way, that number is what I predicted that Ubisoft most likely is currently in debt. I said it's either 1 to 2 billion. And funnily enough, it's interesting how Tencent is very much covering that much money. Very curious.
They're actually not buying stock. They're not allowed to because of corporate agreements that exist. So instead, that money is an investment. It's an investment in a new subsidiary that's currently unnamed. But for the sake of today, I'm just going to call it Ubisoft 2, right? So Ubisoft 1 is the Ubisoft that we know. Ubisoft 2.
Okay. Ubisoft 2, which I call 2, is going to be the new thing with all the good IPs. Ubisoft Prime, yes, not 1, but Prime, because that sounds cooler, is the slob that's left behind. Have fun, Vogue losers, by the way.
2 is the new company. And here's how things are going to work between the two companies, right? So Ubisoft plans to license the brands of Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six to...
Yes. In perpetuality, by the way, which was the most hilarious thing ever. And in perpetuality means, by the way, forever. It can't be changed, which is definitely not gonna stand up at literally any fucking court, by the way. Typically, deals for life never stand up in court because they're stupid.
Ubisoft 2. Ubisoft 2 will also control the studios that make those games, plus the back catalogs and any games that are in development. Now, they're not being fully isolated from the rest of Ubisoft, right? And like the operating structure, the final form of things is still to be confirmed, and the deal's probably not going to close until the end of this year, but we do know that the new company will still be controlled by Ubisoft. Now, Tencent will likely have a seat, but, Ubisoft themselves are saying that they still are in control. Now, this new company, Ubisoft 2, also
fleeting dreams. Again, at this point, Tencent? What the hell is this? Nothing. At this point, Tencent is effectively just trying to take control of Ubisoft because they probably see no real way of recuperating their losses. One of the stupidest things that people were yapping about is that this was all Tencent's grand master plan, aka buy into Ubisoft when its shares are worth 5 times more than they are currently. So again, it's stupidity. It's just like, oh yes, Tencent's plan was to lose billions in revenue. No, it's not happening. But Tencent at this point probably are looking at one of the best ways to recuperate losses is to take over Ubisoft. And then maybe let the people who made Black Myth Wukong take over and see what happens, or something like that. Because something's happening here, okay?
Won't hold any of their own technology.
What Tencent's plan for recuperating losses here? Oh no! Maybe they actually got sold the dream by the Guillemos that for some reason them running the company first time was bad, but now they're gonna do it and it's gonna make billions. Maybe that worked. I don't know. Your guess is kinda as good as mine, honestly.
That's kind of interesting because it means the Anvil engine, which is what powers Assassin's Creed Shadows, and essentially their entire Assassin's Creed game pipeline, which is fairly large, that is still going to be owned by Ubisoft 1. And there's seemingly nothing to stop the Ubisoft 2 studios from collaborating with Ubisoft 1 studios, which does seem a bit weird, or even letting the Ubisoft 1 studios work in games from the franchises that are now going to be controlled by Ubisoft 2. But what is a bit different is that Ubisoft 2 has been sliced off and will basically have its own mission. So the board of Ubisoft 2 have a remit to focus on this, and this is a quote, on enhancing creative vision and streamlining operations with the authority to make swift, high-impact decisions across development, marketing, and distribution. Oh boy, that does sound like a kind of mission statement designed to make investors feel really, really happy. Who doesn't like a swift, high-impact decision? So to basically translate, the whole point is that Ubisoft 2 can work in these franchises without having to worry about the rest of Ubisoft 1 really having input or control, sludge that could slow the whole thing down. So in theory, what they're doing is they're adding another layer of management to speed up Ubisoft's decision process. And generally, the more management you have, the slower all that shit gets. It seems the point, though, is that this is more management, but it is sliced off with its own mission.
So, obviously, this is stupid. Because the people who are going to lead this management are the Guillermos, clowns, and they were already previously in charge. You need to understand, corporate structuring matters only if you're not the CEOs. Then corporate structuring doesn't matter. The CEOs have all the right to bypass any of the corporate norms that they feel like, unless it's government. Then you get investigated by KNAB, or your country's equivalent of corruption. In any case, yeah, this is not gonna work. This is stupid. This is not even the point of this, most likely.
And the others don't really have as much impact or control over them. It really is quite something. Although that being said, it's not like Ubisoft 2 can go completely wild because the Ubisoft board would still have to have final say-off over things. But what about Tencent? Well, Tencent gets to have 20...
Ubisoft board doesn't have final... Well, they do, but not in the sense that he's talking about. Okay, so there's CEOs, there's department heads, then there's the people in charge of the board. The board technically overviews what the CEO and everything else does. The board sometimes is even responsible for certain actions of departments, and the CEO just overlooks everything in general. And sometimes the CEO actually has more power than the board. Go fucking figure. The board doesn't oversee all the decisions. The board is actually a pretty interesting dynamic that typically is not even in line with everything else going on in the company, because all of them have their own wants, what they want for the company, and sometimes the board is very much diametrically opposed to one another in what they want to achieve, and so they kind of fight and destroy the company from inside. But the board is not necessarily the ones that make all of these decisions, or at least the bare minimum, the decisions that Bellier is implying.
5% ownership of Ubisoft 2. Now, in a way, you could look at that and think 1.16 billion euro, that's a lot of money for only a quarter of 3 game franchises. Well, you could say it's a lot of money, but that...
So the Gilmos have 50.001% shares. Okay. And the rest is gonna be probably other equity owners from Ubisoft Prime. That's probably how they're not gonna get sued by other investors.
Entirely depends on how much they can make.
Because honestly, at this point, considering this is not a publicly owned thing, but it's still kind of a part of an Ubisoft to a certain degree, kinda, not really though. Everyone is probably pretty okay that 1 billion piece of shit Ubisoft investment now is technically associated with this thing that's worth 4 billion. So they're probably happy with this.
2022, Ubisoft announced the plan to have 2 billion euro in annual revenues from just 3 franchises: Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Tom Clancy as a whole. Now, that last part has been shaved down to just being Rainbow Six as a part of this deal, and it does make sense. Those are Ubisoft's big money makers, right? I mean, we just went through a long-term plan for what they call Period 3 of Assassin's Creed in our last video. The TLDR? There will be many, many, many video games. Then, of course, Rainbow Six Siege. Well, it just went free to play, and it started to rebuild itself for the next 10 years. And then Far Cry is weird because it still is a massive game franchise, right? They had 10 million sales, I think over 10 million sales, in a single year for Far Cry 6, which is kind of insane. That's a lot of sales. And while Far Cry has become so samey that it seems they're rethinking things a little bit, it obviously can go the distance. So, going forward then,
oh shit, look at that, an actual female protagonist again. Wow, that's so original.
75% of that revenue will go to Ubisoft. 25% of that revenue will go to Tencent. Now, let's just say that 2 billion is real. Well, for Tencent, that is a cool $500 million a year, meaning that they would hit return on investment after only 3 years. That sure makes it seem like the deal of the century, but
just for this loan. Well, not a loan, but covering of the loan, I guess. But yeah, good luck, Ubisoft, fucking selling anything.
remember, Ubisoft 2 is technically licensing these brands from Ubisoft 1, so there may be a fee for that, or of course Ubisoft could do accounting trickery. Let's be real, if you can do accounting
Okay, listen, this is already accounting trickery, by the way.
trickery, you almost certainly will. Now, in the immediate term, right, Ubisoft 1 gets to reinvest the 1.16 billion euro in taking a whole big chunk out of their 2 billion in debt, so that's probably quite nice, and with that, they can fund development of games just at the wider Ubisoft 1 company. But of course, the real value here, right, the real value is in the corporate shenanigans created by Ubisoft 2's existence. And that's because there are various protections built into this deal. Protections like Ubisoft not being able to sell their majority stake in the subsidiary for 2 years. Tencent, by the way, won't be able to sell for 5 years, and Tencent gets first right of refusal on any further transfers and a bunch of other things. And the contract also gives Tencent
That is it. That effectively makes Tencent in charge, by the way.
minority shareholder interests over Ubisoft's biggest 3 franchises, which is fairly humongous, and those interests are protected by a license that is, quote,
Even more
worldwide, exclusive, irrevocable, and perpetual, so it can't just be taken back by a new board.
Also, irrevocable is a funny thing also. Again, perpetual already is probably not winning any court cases, but irrevocable also is probably not winning any court cases.
That really does lock in control in a fairly ironclad way. And that means that taking over Ubisoft just got much harder for the activist investors. Of course, that's AJ Investments, the people who we've been following since last year. And it also means that in an absolute crisis scenario of everything being sold off, Ubisoft knows that these brands cannot work with the rest of the company's tech, which means that in that case, they're effectively worthless. By circling the wagons around their most valuable assets, what it now means is the rest of Ubisoft feels pretty damn exposed. If you're not in one of those big 3 games that are real well protected, you're going to be worried. So let's think about those numbers from the start. If this new company is worth 4.3 billion and the old one is worth a third of that, what does that say? What does that imply about the value of everything else in Ubisoft? I've got to start this off with a quote that was given to Insider Gaming. Here it is. We feel expletive if we're not on the big 3. I imagine that expletive is fucked, and they're saying, we're fucked if we're not in the big 3. That's apparently what a dev said, and it makes sense because there's a very simple read in this entire scenario. If you don't work in a game that is now owned by Ubisoft 2, in a way you don't matter, because Ubisoft 2 is literally the thing that's got the high value. And that means that people are very worried about being laid off, studios being closed, and intellectual property being sold. And management have not smoothed out those fears yet. Now, there's at least some degree of comfort to be drawn from the split. The Division and Ghost Recon being retained does suggest that Ubisoft leadership weren't willing to transfer all of their biggest brands to Ubisoft 2, so that does mean that they're
What was the Division? It was some kind of shit, right? It was falling apart slowly.
still retaining some of the good live services that they've got, like For Honor and Brawlhalla, and it kind of suggests that they do have plans to, make revenue that doesn't involve Ubisoft 2. So that could be good, and the deal does in theory protect all of Ubisoft, so Ubisoft 1 and Ubisoft 2, from being sold off in a very short-term way to please the very hostile investors like AJ Investments. But what it's not is a guaranteed win. Ubisoft will immediately have quite the balance sheet problem. I mean, if 25% of their 3 biggest franchise revenues are going to Tencent, that's 25% less for the rest of the company. That could make the balance sheet look bad.
Well, Tencent is not going to demand this shit instantaneously. They're going to see if this works or doesn't, and then they're going to figure out, do they demand the money or not.
could mean more closures. It could mean layoffs as a result of all of this. So staff are not wrong to be worried here. And remember, it seems the Guillemets are principally concerned with keeping the company under their name, keeping it stable, and then making sure that the company remains whole. So ultimately, it comes down to the very same principle that we have been arguing for since this whole story started. That the biggest, most profitable, most valuable parts of Ubisoft are not the parts that make the good niche games, like Rayman or like Anno. The stock market does not care about those whatsoever, but now it looks to staff like Ubisoft management also don't really care about them as well.
This cost them 200 million to make, by the way. This is a 2D platformer. 2 million, 200 million.
And that's going to mean people are scared. So the question is whether they can prove to staff that they are better than the investors that they're stopping. So let's review the threat that Ubisoft faces. So it's not eliminated by this deal.
The threat is that the vocal losers that killed the company are still there and jumping around.
In some ways, this deal could make it a bit worse. As an example,
Rainbow Six Siege has literally trans operators, by the way, 10 out of 10.
The market reacted well to the news of this deal for about 5 hours. By Monday, the price was lower than before the announcement, which maybe doesn't look great.
Yeah. No shit, it doesn't look great, because everyone else gets shafted now. Like, you are literally working in a situation where Ubisoft Prime can be liquidified if someone feels like it, because it's shit, and then you have Ubisoft 2.0 to fall back on. Yeah, investors are not gonna be happy about this.
You know, all those things to protect Ubisoft as a part of this deal also are things that make it a less desirable investment, right? So one of the things that AJ have been furious about, so they say, is minority shareholder stuff. Now, you got to remember, AJ Investments, whenever I say activist investors, I don't mean that in the way that you may think. Activist investors are the type who will jump in, try to affect very short-term change to jack up a stock price, and then they'll exit their position, having made a shitload of money. So essentially in this deal, we see moves made to insulate Ubisoft from the threat that they pose. But those changes do sort of make Ubisoft a bit of a worse investment. Now, we can then pair that with the perception that the company has got nothing to release.
Okay, that's pretty much it. Again, no, what's gonna happen now, the future of Ubisoft? Well, as predicted, whatever happens to Ubisoft, there's no way it keeps functioning in the way that it did function, and here's that, so we're right on the money there. And now it's just a matter of waiting until, well, the Guillemets completely F it up again, and Ubisoft just turns into woke slop. Wait a minute, it's already like that. Even the new parts of the company, like, nothing's gonna change. That's the thing. That's at least what I expect. Nothing's really gonna change. Ubisoft is bad, they're doing bad, they have been doing bad, and they're gonna keep on doing bad. That's it. They just don't understand that the gamers want games, not political pandering and messaging, and calling them evil. As long as Ubisoft doesn't fix that, that's not gonna work. And what the hell is this? The hell? I don't see anything like... What the hell is that? I don't see anything like that. And oh no, I slightly do. Anyway, that was Billiard News 10 out of 10. Bye!